Welcome to Thoughtspeak, the original Animorphs Podcast, dedicated to K.A. Applegate's sci-fi classic. I'm your host, Michelle.
And I'm Coleman.
And tonight we are bringing you a very, I don't know if I'd want to call it special book, but one that we recently read a couple of times, I think, in both of our experiences. We had to read this thing a couple of times. We'll talk a little bit about why that was the case. But yeah, tonight we are talking Animorphs number 47, The Resistance.
Yeah, it is special. I think it is different. But I would like to point out real quick that this is our first foray back into reviewing and talking about an actual Animorphs book. Not that the graphic novel is not an Animorphs book, but we're back into the original series, first time in like 4 years, something like that.
Oh, heck yeah. It's been a little bit of a time gap, not counting our most previous episode, which you should absolutely go listen to if you haven't heard it yet. We got the author of the new graphic novel on the show to talk about that, and it was a wonderful reunion and a return to form for us and Thoughtspeak all together. The world celebrated, I'm sure, and if you haven't heard it, go listen to that.
There were parades. They dedicated the day to us. It was amazing. You should have been there. Can't believe you didn't hear about it.
Yes. It was worth an earth-shattering event, sure. So this episode, though, is going to be really cool because it's going to be a new book and a new story to talk about. And boy, howdy, we are really getting into the winding down of the series, which sounds boring when described like that. But this is where all the action and drama and tension and everything is raising. All the stakes are raising, the drama's raising. Things are starting to accelerate plot-wise. And it all happens here in this book.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that this book has a very minor plot footprint, even though it's a big part of it. I just feel like this situation has been done a few times in different ways, but we'll get into that. First, we definitely want to welcome you back to the show if this is your first episode back, and then also thank some of our new Patreon contributors. This is exciting to have that start back up and come back with a bounce, with a punch. I don't know what you'll call it.
That's right. It's a Patreon tease for sure. And you might be aware that the Thoughtspeak podcast has and operates a patreon.com account. And it is just so incredibly useful to us as creators, as showrunners, as producers, as people who want to make you the most professional show possible with the best equipment possible. We want to do all that, and it's our Patreon subscribers. We love them so much, we call them the Thoughtspeak Auxiliary. And you can actually join and become a member of our auxiliary. It's possible. Right off the bat, we want to thank our three big Patreon supporters currently. We've got Jeff, we've got Ben, and we've got our old friend Andrew. And this Patreon, as it stands now, is but a mere fragment of what it once was, my dear listeners. Because at our height, at our heyday, at our glory day, we had many subscribers and contributors and a sizable income that really helped us to deliver the show with, I want to say consistency, but, knowing our past history of delivering consistently, that's a strong word. Still, the point remains, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Thoughtspeak. And
we recognize that we need to work to get that back. Those people relied on us, and to some extent, we dropped the ball in the fact that we walked away from the podcast there for a bit. But we're excited to be back, and I really do think our lives are in a situation where we're going to be able to put these episodes out regularly and kind of figure out what the future of the podcast looks like. But definitely we need to see that there's still interest in people who want to support us, because podcasting ain't cheap sometimes. So anyway, we appreciate any help.
Totally. All help is appreciated. And in fact, we like returning the favor as much as we can wherever we're able. And to that end, stick around for the very end of the episode after we give our reviews. We are going to read a few thoughts and mini reviews from our Patreon supporters. And like I said, if you want your thoughts channeled through my mouth here on the show, you can do that too. Channeled is my phrasing.
I'd just say thoughts spoken.
We can make that happen.
Thoughts spoken,
okay.
like the title of the podcast.
No, yeah, I see what you did there, and I don't care for it. So that's my spiel. That's our Patreon. Please check it out tonight. I keep saying tonight, when it is tonight, I guess. That makes sense. But, whenever they're listening to it, it's probably not tonight. Anyway, we are talking Animorphs number 47, The Resistance. As I keep mentioning, we are dissecting the cover currently, and boy howdy, you pointed out that it's almost like a painting sort of style, which is a little bit different from what we've seen in some of these other covers.
Well, it's a painting, and it's in the style. Some people who read these books might not remember, but before these books, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you had things like Babysitter's Club and the kind of mid-grade
Sweet Valley
series
High
chapter books. Yeah, the chapter books of that time. They
the
all did
Boxcar Children.
Yeah, they all did painted covers like this. 90s books and Goosebumps and Animorphs, they were the ones really branching out and trying new styles with how these books looked. But this one specifically, it's like maybe they didn't have the normal guy available and they went back to or maybe it's just like an ode to those older style books. I'm not sure.
I think honestly that I think a lot of that media aimed at younger readers utilizes this what I would call photorealistic sort of painting style. I think they use that as more or less an appropriate medium, I guess, to entice readers, I suppose. It doesn't particularly work in this instance though, where Jake just has this like dumb, perplexed look on his face, and he's turning into a beaver.
Which also has a dumb, perplexed look on it.
I was going to say, which is not the most intelligent looking creature, but the midway between the morphs looks so cringy, I guess. And knowing that these morphs on the covers are not depicted how the morphs would actually take place within the stories, just makes little beaver Jake look even more ridiculous.
The middle transformation, like the direct middle of the morph, that one actually looks like that painting in Italy of the woman who tried to repair the old painting of Jesus, and she just ended up smearing it all around. It's pretty close.
Interesting. Well, I think he looks like a guinea pig.
He does look like a guinea pig.
And that's about it. And then they chose to back this. They chose to back this with these just totally regular kind of like sky with clouds, like nothing unusual about it. Kind of pretty actually with some purple in it. But otherwise it's like not noteworthy. It just makes you sort of think of like a dumb beaver on a sunny day.
Well, yeah, and then they were like, they choose a different color for the fonts and stuff, which each Animorph book on the front. And this one, I guess they were just like, oh, cool painting with some clouds about. Let's go teal. Let's just do a teal on top of this. It's just very
maybe
all over the place.
Do you happen to have access to the quote on the front cover?
What would you do if you lost your mind to a yerk?
That reeks of 90s PSA material that was like sitting around on somebody's hard drive, and they replaced like marijuana with a yerk.
Well, it's just funny because this book series was so big at this point. At the point that this came out, it was this massive series, and they were still doing these front cover quotes, like, I don't know, to like trick someone into trying the book out or something. Like, it could be more relevant. It could be like, oh, in this one, Jake has to make a tough decision, but he's got some help from the past, or something like that.
Yeah, right? Yeah. It would be very simple to put a little bit of effort into making a quote that entices readers and is relevant to the story held within. But like we said, they tend to go with these things that, honestly, I think they just had a big list prepared.
No, they looked at this painting of this small child turning into a beaver, and they're like, no, we got him with that. That's the hook. We don't need to do any more than that.
It might be. And actually, what you just said perfectly describes how I feel about this inner flap picture, because it is literally just like a pretty beautiful, I'll give it that, scenery, like a landscape photo of a beaver.
I mean, it kind of looks like a hotel painting.
Sure, I'm not hanging this thing in my home.
One of those trees. Throw a Hork-Bajir back there.
Throw Marco and Cassie in the pond, like wrestling with one of the beavers. There you go.
Or you know what? If you would have thrown some tents on that far shore, like some campground tents, that would have been more relevant right there.
And they could have done like bright yellows and like pinks to really make the colors pop. That'd have been awesome.
You know, I hear that the artist for all of the covers and the inside covers is doing the rounds on a couple podcasts. And man, I really want to talk to him. I'm just really worried about him listening to past episodes, because I think these covers are incredibly iconic. I think they're one of the main reasons these books sold so well. But I just don't know what kind of like marketing directives they were given on some of these inside covers. I never understood.
You know what? I wanna give the poor gentleman. I've read a lot of his Q&As and stuff, and I think, it being the 90s, this guy, got this job he was pretty excited about or whatever, and did some kooky kind of art, and he had no idea that decades later, the children that were reading this stuff were going to grow up and like talk about him publicly. So let's approach it with really happy to have this stuff, nice work kind of approach, right? But we can still criticize slightly, because that's what we do.
Yeah. Criticizing children's books is what we've built our empire on.
There you go. That should be our tagline for the auxiliary when you sign up. All right, I'm going to read the back of the book. How's that sound?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
I'm making you excited yet? Okay, wonderful. Here we go. The Animorphs and Axe have to make the most important decision they've ever had to make. Do they continue to fight the Yeerks in secret? Or is it time to let everyone know there's a resistance? That the Animorphs exist, and that Earth does stand a small chance against the invasion. Jake knows that either choice is a major one, not one that some kid should be responsible for, but he's getting tired of the pressure. So even though he realizes the other Animorphs need him to be strong, he doesn't feel that way. In fact, he feels just the opposite. And Jake knows if he starts to lose it, the Animorphs are done. On a very special episode of the Animorphs, a very special after school special.
I mean, it's right. It's not wrong in all of that. Like, I wish the book
gives
would
the
have
wrong
been
information.
Yeah, I mean, I wish it would have been more about that. I mean, those things are touched on. They do talk about, briefly talk about whether they should go out in the open, which they did in the last book as well. Jake does, suffer with the idea of him being the only one, but I don't think it really pushes that idea strong enough that Jake is like about to like give up. I wish that would have been
No, they are not going to be able to adequately describe just how damaged Jake is as a person, as a character, with these little back of the book blurbs. And that's not what they should have done. This should have set up.
I'm saying the actual book should have done that. I don't think the actual book that we're about to talk about did that well enough.
Oh no, I agree with you there too. I don't think what we read inside the book is an accurate reflection of what the back of the book statement here is saying, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a more apt description would have been something about the Free Hork-Bajir colony, which they just don't even really talk about on the back of this book here. You don't get that.
I'd say that's the main plot point of this book is what happens with the Hork-Butcher colony. So,
dang, Skippy, and boy, we're gonna get into that a lot. So that's the whole covers, I guess. And we're gonna do this one now. Okay, so
hold on. Let's get ready. Let's get pumped. We're about to jump in the book. You ready to jump into it?
100%.
And we are back. I hope you enjoyed that wonderful ad. Who read that? That was just really sold me on whatever they were selling.
Yeah, very nice attempt at a segue. Okay, so I'm super excited about this book because I was telling Coleman a little bit like before we started. I really want to talk about a lot of the things that happen primarily in the middle of the book. A lot of the meat of this book lies with this encounter that our group of heroes has with some other people, some other characters, okay? We'll get to it. But as I go on and talk about this story, we have another emerging plot or story that's going to develop, and I wanted to know just offhand how Coleman, my co-host, wants to handle this narratively as we go through and talk about the story, because I feel like it might be appropriate to do. I would not mind approaching it from like a almost two different kind of book reviews standpoint. This could be a twofer, two book reviews in one episode. Wow.
Yeah. So
if you can elaborate.
Yeah. So I think because this book is so weird in how it's laid out, I think we could do, instead of going by plot beat by beat, because I think both plots are kind of loose. I don't think they're like very detailed. We don't jump full into either plot. We're kind of just hitting plot points.
They're pretty
stories.
minimal.
Yeah. So I think we could summarize one and then summarize the other and then talk about how they, what relevance they might have to each other. Does that sound good and different from how we normally do things?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, I'm probably just going to read my summary exactly as I wrote it, because I write it the way I do. It's very specific, and I can just read it. And I didn't send you my summary this time, because I know that when I do that, you're tempted to just plagiarize my work. And so I'll go through my summary as we normally do, right? And,
okay, is it massive, though? Because I want them to match in kind of length, like what we talked about. Because I'm just going to literally summarize.
No, because as we just said, there's not a whole lot, like, plot-wise that goes on. You know, it's just, like, maybe 4 or 5 different, like, scenes, really. And I can give you all the information, like, right up front. Like, this is a very easy book. Oh, go ahead.
Well, real quick, I just want to, if someone is listening to this and is incredibly confused with what we're talking about, this book has 2 stories. You
don't even have to describe it yet. I'll get into that with my first plot point here.
Okay, let's go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jake's feeling down about this whole alien invasion thing, and you know he's just gotten off of this one mission. You know that it's not a fun time being in a war, right? And he comes home and he's just kind of like hating life, being the leader of the Animorphs. And as he's stressing about the fighting and all that, and his brother, you know, being just a source of pure evil that he has to live with, His mom asks him, to do chore work because on top of all of this alien warfare responsibility, Jake's also got to do, like regular teen stuff. So he goes out into the basement to clean up as per his mom's request, and he ends up finding a chest with a whole bunch of artifacts from his late Grandpa G. And inside this chest, he finds this old war diary, which belongs to one Isaiah Fitzhenry. Okay, and this little diary entries that we get between chapter breaks becomes the B plot of this book, essentially. So Lieutenant Fitzhenry's whole plot is that he's in charge of defending this town, and he has to work with a bunch of different civilians, as well as some who are, gasp, not the same race as him. And his struggle is about, learning to accept the help from those that are around him, though they're not the ideal soldiers, right? Is that a good explanation of what goes on there?
Yeah, I'll definitely go into that just very slightly more in depth in my summary, but you can continue on with some crazy tree lizards and their exploits.
Oh yeah, you're talking about the Hork-Bajir. We're gonna get into that and say that word a billion times more. So Jake gets a call from Cassie in the dead of night at 4 a.m. and she does something that I really love, and she, asks him, she tells him this nonsense, it sounds like nonsense or regular kid speak to anybody who would be listening, like Tom, for instance. She says, my friend Toby wanted to ask you or something, I think she likes you. And Jake, of course, understands this as a signal to go meet up with Toby, the leader of the Free Hork-Bajir, in their Hidden Valley Hork-Bajir ranch, right? So Jake does that. He morphs and he flies to the Hork-Bajir Valley right away. At this point in time, it's kind of cool to know that they're working behind the scenes as well with the Chi, because they mentioned that they're having the Chi fill in for them during the conflict of this book as well, which is a practice they start doing more and more, and I think that's a great idea, utilizing them and taking advantage of what they can do.
I mean, they've been doing that throughout the entire series. That's nothing new.
Pretty sporadically. We've been talking a lot, I think, about how the Chi are underutilized. At least that's been my prevailing opinion.
They could definitely do a lot more. I agree with that.
Chi Chronicles. Make it happen. K.A.
Oh, so good.
Well, anyway, after Jake arrives at the Hidden Valley Ranch, he sees all of his buddies down there, like the group's assembled, like this plot is off and running. And after a brief little talk with his team and Toby, they update him on this situation that's unfolding that is really bad for them and the colony. They're in danger because one of these free Hork-Bajir, they go on these raids every so often to try and free more of their, enslaved comrades. And one of these poor free bastards got captured again. And this is basically a death sentence for our team because Yerkes getting inside of that head means they have access to a lot of information that's really bad for our heroes, yeah? So this puts the team at odds right away. Jake is the calm, collected leader who wants, everyone to just leave, abandon ship, get out of the valley. Like, we know the Yerkes are going to be coming very soon, and this is what we need to do. And of course, the Hork-Bajir, being stubborn aliens that, are sick of being uprooted all the time, want to make their stand. So Jake and Toby and the team have a big powwow. They strategize exactly what they're going to do because Jake realizes he can't get them to abandon their valley, so they've got to try and defend it the best they can. They plan to kind of fight away from the valley and retreat up into the hills as necessary, and in doing so, moving themselves and the Hork-Bajir closer to human civilization. It's closer towards, where they all live. So Tobias is flying around, running sky cams like he does, and he reports that there's another snag in the whole thing, in that some campers are in the valley currently, and they could potentially be in a lot of danger if they get caught up in this conflict. So they suspect that they're non-controllers. They feel like they're confident enough that these are regular civilians. They're people that they can, more or less try to warn, right? So Jake feels mildly more compelled to help them rather than just like outright ignore them and let them be, killed. So while they're scoping them out, he also sees the beavers working on the dam, and he gets this whole bright idea to like build the bigger beaver dam to flood out the Yerks. And that's like the whole rest of the plot of the book, right? And that's probably what most people remember, especially because there's the damn beavers on the cover, right? But the far more interesting conflict this book sets up is with these other characters, right? So I really want to put a lot more emphasis on talking about them. A funny note here is that they all go down to the beaver dam and try to grab some beavers to acquire, of course. And Jake puts Axe in charge of the whole dam build operation because Axe is like good with math and sticks or something, while Jake and Tobias go to meet with the campers. At this point, we also get a very important morph lore update that always excites people like us. He says, "Thank God we could finally morph some halfway decent clothes, the result of a whole lot of experience." And that's it. That's all we get on that morph lore update.
Yeah, it's weird that they didn't go into it further. Like what, them practicing that, or if they're just more experienced now. I wonder if that was from the top with K. Applegate being like, hey, they can morph clothes now. Or if that's just thrown in by the ghostwriter. Who knows?
It sounds like a convenience thing, because as we discussed in previous Thoughtspeaks, it would be way more interesting to see them like developing the power and, experimenting in various ways and, updating the morph lore, through training.
Well, we could have even gotten...
feels like a shortcut.
It could have even gotten part of the plot where they had a book where, they had to get away from, some Yerks, but they were in morph, and they had to blend in with a bunch of people, and they just morphed back into their clothes so they could immediately like get into a crowd or something. It's like a do or die moment. Even something like that would have been a little more better for transitioning.
Oh, yeah. Well, generally, I think anything they could have done to expand the lore would be better to be more fleshed out than these one-sentence blurbs. Because this is a pretty important update, I think,
Yeah, no, it's weird that it was so offhand.
Definitely. I want to do more readings, I guess, and I want to do, in particular, this like whole scene where, maybe not the whole scene, but a lot of this dialogue where Jake and Tobias are approaching these campers, and they're doing so with the intention of revealing themselves. Well, not quite revealing themselves. First, Jake attempts to make up an excuse, like a lame excuse about an oncoming snowstorm. But they're not really having any of that. They're like smarter than that. It's nice weather, and if this were the modern age, they would have just updated it to be like, yeah, we looked at our smartphone and Google says otherwise. I think that's how an adaptation would have handled this part. But he makes a fool of himself and decides that morphing in front of them is the only way that's really going to kind of scoot the conflict along. And they do just that.
This is what I was going to bring up earlier. I don't understand, to an extent, with this book, why this group is special. Because they've run into, this happens multiple times throughout the series, that they're doing something up in the mountains and they run across some campers. And there's been a couple times they haven't been able to save them, but there's been other times where they've tried to like run them out of camp with like a bear morph or something. So, and like steer them. I think it happened in the first Megamorphs book. They steer them.
Buddy, you just brought up a very good point that I didn't think of. They could have just, morphed like Rhino and literally scared them away.
I mean, they've literally done that in the books already. That's what I'm saying. It's not new. So
yeah, they could have done that, but they chose to do this other thing.
They wanted to have this confrontation where they, bring some more people into the fold. And I just think it's weird how it was done in that they didn't talk for a second about why this is different than when they've done it in the past. Or maybe the ghostwriter just hadn't read those books. I don't know.
You know what? I guess maybe we should have confirmed if this one is a ghost-written one or not. If this is KA, it unfortunately I don't think says in the.
No, I can confirm right now. It's written by
Ellen Garreau.
Yeah, Ellen Garreau.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Well,
the outline is by K.A. Applegate.
Gotcha. Okay. I'll read this one bit that I like here really quick. So this is Jake and Tobias. They are, trying to talk to these campers and get them to move, and they're not buying it. So I turn to Tobias. Okay, we're desperate. I don't want to do this, but I don't think we have a choice. Are you sure? Tobias whispered. What if one of them bolts, or attacks us, or runs straight to the local media? If the Yeerks hear that 2 human boys were morphing... I know, Tobias, I snapped. I know there are consequences. That was my job, to know the consequences. It was also my job to make the tough decisions, to lead. So I started to morph. And that, I just like that dynamic here between Jake and Tobias. Tobias is almost like Jake's conscience, in a sense. He's here and he's like asking, the questions. He's reminding Jake of how important this stuff is. And to hear that Jake snap on him and, just remind him that he's aware of the consequences. He's been doing this leader thing long enough now.
He's obviously just stressed out too, but it's interesting. Maybe it's just because we just read the graphic novel version of the original book, but it's come a long way since Jake, helping him from some bullies who were giving him a swirly in the bathroom, where Tobias is actually like standing up to Jake here and like making sure, checking his logic on everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very telling actually that he assigns the other Animorphs the task of doing the beaver dam thing, and specifically brings Tobias with him. He could have brought Cassie, he could have brought Marco, but he chose Tobias because I think Tobias really fits his like number one kind of, in a commanding sense, right?
Oh no, that's totally Marco. Marco is definitely his number one. He gives him all the
I think you're
directive
wrong.
And
I think Marco's his best friend for sure and a reliable contact, but Marco has too much free will and independence, and we just saw him demonstrate how he's willing to go against Jake's orders, which he very clearly did in that book where they freed Visor 1 or his mom. That's why Marco's not his real number one, because he doesn't take commands quite like Tobias does. Tobias is utterly dedicated to the cause.
Tobias just takes commands, though. I mean, I think it's that in the past, I think who has Jake trusted the team with more often with their own plans? I think it's Marco. Tobias has always been more of a scout and definitely, like you said, a conscience. But I don't see Jake relying on Tobias too much throughout the series as far as, shouldering the weight of command.
No, not so much in the way of command. Yeah, you're right about that. I think that he knows that Tobias is more or less a much more manipulatable soldier.
And more reliable,
Marco.
Sure. I'll give you that. Definitely reliable.
Yeah, well, it's...
Unless a bird is attacked or caged, and then he goes rogue.
I like seeing Jake and Tobias's interactions. I feel like maybe those two don't get enough screen time together.
Yeah, it's always Tobias is always paired off with Rachel, and Jake's always paired off with Marco or Cassie. So you're right; they should have given them a bit more to do throughout the books.
Definitely, but moving on. These campers they have an obsession with science fiction and Star Trek in particular. And only probably 2 of these characters are really relevant to this story and to the plot and to what this book is trying to say. And those characters are Emily. She's like the surrogate, teen or child or somebody that the reader or the team can identify with, right? She's the kid. The overly ambitious kid, in fact, who says things like, I want to help, and we have to free the Hork-Bajir and crush the Yeerks, right? Very idealistic stuff. And in fact, Tobias even says, remind you of anyone, Jake? And very clearly referencing how she's similar to Rachel. So Emily is there with her brother and her dad, Richard, the other probably important character to the story. And I think they represent these civilians that sort of get caught up in the war efforts. And in these guys' case, they have a severe lack of understanding of what they're getting themselves into in this situation. When these kids approach them and turn into a Siberian tiger and a hawk, their reaction is one that's more of fantasy, right? They relate it to what they know in sci-fi. They think they're part of the Federation and that they're, I don't know, gonna battle with phasers or something. You know, they've got a very...
I think it went too far into that, where it's just like these guys have no... Even if they're huge Trekkies and all of that, it's weird that they focus so much on if aliens were real, they would be exactly like Star Trek, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe that was done to just really quickly drive the point home that this Richard character is like... He's like kind of like Marco's dad. I view him as like this aging, well-to-do kind of dork. He's a father, obviously. And he's idealistic, I guess. He wants to help when he hears about this grand situation because he thinks it's like this grand, noble thing. He doesn't understand the complexities and the realities of war like Jake and Tobias are trying to tell him. Tobias even specifically says, Jake, you're not giving them a real image of what's going to happen here. You need to be more graphic. And Jake tries. He tries over and over again to tell these people, look, this is not going to be fun. This is a war. And they accidentally end up recruiting some of these people who, once again, have no real scope or scale of what they're doing. They're young and idealistic, and they want to get involved in a war. And I think that's a super interesting plot element to really think about and talk about in terms of like what it means for the characters, and especially as it pertains to their recruitment methods. Because as I was reading it, I kind of started to feel like these are very similar recruitment methods to how the Yeerks bring about, their volunteer hosts into their war efforts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that manipulative, but it is definitely, they needed bodies and they put them on the front lines. Although I didn't really think in their situation with what they knew was coming with the Dracon beams and bug fighters and everything else. I really didn't think, some campers who haven't been part of the fight or even, have a grasp of what they're getting into would have made so much of a difference that Jake would take this big of a risk. It just seems weird. It seems out of character, and very, trying to push the plot forward into saying something specific without it making a lot of logical sense.
Yeah. They could have certainly dedicated more time to, I like Richard and his daughter Emily's side plot here. It's just, unfortunately, more of an example of like a civilian who gets caught up in a war that they don't quite, understand the full scope and scale of. So they bring these campers back to the Hork-Bajir ranch.
I'm going to jump in real quick because this, you are doing a full-on summary, which I'm all for. We can go in depth with it because I'm glad there's more to talk about. But I want to jump over to the side story because it's going to be much more compact of telling what that story is. And I think it'd be nice to, just like the book itself, we're jumping in the middle to talk about this other story.
It's a good spot to do it, too.
Yeah, if it gives any context to the rest of the book. As we said at the beginning, there's two stories going on here, and they really are parallel throughout the book. You're going every other chapter back and forth. But I think this other story, they're much shorter pieces of the pie and tell a shorter story than the main part of the book with the Hork-Bajir and defending the valley and all that. But basically, it tells the story. Jake's down in his basement reading these notes. It's a journal left behind by Isaiah Fitzhenry, and he talks about going to this small town during the Civil War with a handful of men because they've been beaten and they've lost a good chunk of their reserves. I think they say they're down to like 15 men or something like that. It's crazy. And in Civil War, that's kind of how things were. Even a large battalion was like 100 or 200 men, which doesn't seem that much, but it was in the States during that time.
It's a bigger army than I have access to.
Yeah, he gets to this town, and he gets a telegraph from another larger general telling them that they think that the just a really mean Confederate soldier battalion, really disastrous to multiple forts and battles throughout the way, are coming in on their area, and they think they're going to attack this town. And they're probably way outgunned in just numbers. This battalion that's coming for them, the Confederate soldiers, probably has like 300 men. And they start, working with the townspeople and with what men they have to try to build up some kind of resistance. What ends up happening, which you mentioned, is that some freed slaves from the South come down from the mountains after observing them setting up these protections and meeting with Isaiah, saying that they want to help. They want to be a part of fighting. And Isaiah is absolutely against this. I don't think they paint him as a abolitionist at all. I really don't think that he still has his own doubts and his own biases and racism going on with him. But he's more open to it than, let's say, the normal Northern soldier. But his biggest reservation of them helping is the fact that the townspeople would turn on them, because he knows that the townspeople and even a lot of his own soldiers would not fight alongside them if they knew they'd have to fight alongside these former slaves. And so he's struggling with this, and we go back to him multiple times where they're setting up things, and eventually he realizes that the numbers of the Confederate soldiers that are coming are just so much that they have to do anything they can. And he starts letting the freed slaves dig ditches and help out with just the general workload. And during this time where they're helping build fortifications, they get attacked by this forward scout party of this Confederate army, and it goes okay. Not awful, not great, but the freed slaves, they're not allowed guns or anything, but they help and they fight with shovels and whatever they have near them, and they spook the Confederate soldier scout party enough to win the day. Most of them are still hurt after. Yeah, and most of them are still hurt after this first barrage, but they get away with it. And so from there on, some of the townspeople saw how they fought, and they're still very wary of the freed slaves for various reasons at the time. But Isaiah starts forming a friendship with kind of the leader of the freed slaves, and kind of maybe friendship's a little more than what you'd say, but he definitely sees him as a good man and someone who's willing to actually fight, and he's not going to turn tail and run when the shooting starts. So he starts relying on them and even training them to fight with guns. And it's not told directly, but it's implied that when the actual army comes, and it is real, you have the numbers they said are real, that it was like 300 strong. When the actual army comes to face them, you have Isaiah, the freed slaves, and the townspeople all fighting together and kind of putting their differences aside, even though those biases are still there. And
nice.
It's a really nice ending to that story, and showing. I thought it was very real of the time, because they didn't try to paint it as more nostalgic or whitewash it in any way. Like, they really were. Every single person in the story was incredibly racist to these freed slaves in their thoughts and how they acted towards them. So it's nice that they didn't paint that any different way.
But yeah, the point was, despite that, they were able to come together, right?
Yeah, and they lost horribly. I think Jake's ancestor survived, but most of those men died at the end. So
that was the implication.
But they did come together, and honestly, in you getting ready to jump into the rest of the summary, I think the ties to the actual story are very loose in both metaphor and just literal plot. To me, other than the fact that they're fighting a battle they're probably going to lose, that they had to give up ground at multiple points, and that, I don't know. I see the parallels, because you do have people coming together in the Hork-Bajir Valley. I just don't think they matched, or why they would use a Civil War story to match this. I thought it was very... Even though I liked both stories, I thought it was very random to have these connect to each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I'll flesh out a little bit more on why I believe they did that. Because I thought it was very an odd choice, I guess, to very, very specific to use the Civil War, that period, and that, it seems like they wanted to say something, right, about
the
race
Hork-Bajir.
relations.
That's what you're about to say, right? The Hork-Bajir are freed slaves. That's kind of the...
Yeah, totally. But it's also about, getting along with people who are different races. It's just that this book has the allegory with space reptiles, So it's a little harder to take serious.
But you didn't have the relationships in the Animorphs plot that you did in the Civil War plot. Like, in the Civil War plot, they're very much, the race problems, the friendship between the leaders. Like, you didn't have that parallel where even, like, Jake could have realized something or some kind of made a connection with the Hork-Bajir. There's no, like the campers are just down to help them and then realize they're in a bad situation. It's just, I don't know, it just felt very different. It had very loose connections.
Okay, well, I thought there's at least one instance, I think, where they do a little bit of comparison. You could call it comparison between the Hork-Bajir and humans, right? Particularly the Hork-Bajir in the present and the people of the town in the past. There's one scene where they're just kind of like walking with the Hork-Bajir, and one of them like is carrying a baby. And something happens, they trip or something and drop the baby, and then they quickly struggle to pick up the kid and carry on moving. And Jake points out like how similar they are to humans in that way. And you get that little visual of like, yeah, if I, drop my baby, I'd pick him up real quick.
Yeah, so, not super similar though. I don't drop my baby. Is that just me?
Oh, well, not everyone's a super dad. Like you. Especially not the Hork-Bajir and their abysmal
they're just dropping living quality. Out of trees and
So
I would hope that the walking razor blade people aren't clumsy.
Exactly. I think they could have given us a couple of more similarities, I guess. But whatever. It is what it is. That's basically like the end of that story, though. It's assumed that the Civil War obviously was a battle that was won, or a war that was won, but there were many losing battles that made it up, right?
Yeah, that was the point, I guess, that they were really trying to make.
Cool. Well, okay, there's some finality there, I guess. Back in the A plot, they're like prepping all the people and their traps and stuff. They're making weapons. They've got assembly lines flowing. Jake and Tobias check in with the Beaver team, and they're doing their thing to dam this valley up. Jake wants to just end the conflict really quickly and flood the whole valley. He's really banking a lot on that plan. working out for him. There's a pretty good line here where he returns to the team and he kind of has to fill them in on the campers, right? It's funny how the team splits up here a little bit, and then we get to see the dynamic of Jake being a leader and then having to inform his soldiers, the people that he's most familiar with commanding. He has to tell them that they brought on, some new help, some hired hands, right? And they're not that happy about it. So he says, I landed on the bank and began to demorph. They've been excellent help. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. This is Cassie talking about beavers. He said, after she talks about beavers, he says, that's great. I said absently. I had to tell them, but suddenly I wish I didn't have to say a word. Listen, those campers from down the valley want to help the Hork-Bajir. You mean they know, Rachel? Jake, are you nuts? Drastic times call for drastic measures, I said evenly. You used those words at the meeting yesterday. Oh, okay, I did. Thanks for listening. I love that little reprimand of Rachel, and Rachel actually going along with it, like, oh yeah, you're right. No, that checks out. Let's they can help. There's another little cool part here where Marco he opposes it, and Jake very earnestly has to tell him. Marco says, Jake, who decided it was okay to make public appearances? Jake says, well, you, actually. And that's not an accusation, it's a fact. When you told your dad about us, you did what you had to do, and so did I. Marco defends himself by saying, that was different with my dad. Maybe even with those sailors and Marines on the aircraft carrier. I don't know. But come on, Jake, you don't even know these campers, who they work for, who they're related to, where they're from. Jake then responds, they're a bunch of sci-fi fanatics who believe in aliens before Tobias and I even showed them anything. I tried to smile, pretend I wasn't as worried as Marco. They thought we were from the Federation. Can you believe it? No one laughed. That is immediately followed by this super ominous bit of text that... Remember when, I think something like this happened when the Elemist was introduced. The text changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yep, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Cool. So let me read this. There's a dash lines across the bottom of this page, and then in a different font, it says, quite ominously, the countdown has begun. It will all be over very, very soon. And that text right there, I kind of skipped over it the first time I was reading it, but every time I read it subsequently, I think that text has big dick energy right there. Because...
Well, hold on. Is that at the bottom of the page on the book? Is it just part of the countdown to the end of the books? Or is it actually part of that?
It's dropped into the story. So... the reason I read that scene right before this, was because this was Jake, as I said, bringing his troops into the knowing of, hey, we've got more help, right? These are civilians that we're including. I think this text here is meant to say, this is where the story's going to go from now on. We are going to see non-combatants and civilians being pulled into this war and this conflict. Right? I think that's what it's really trying to get at here, is the countdown is starting, and this is the quantifiable point when things have changed.
I think you're right. I don't remember reading... I know you're talking about with the Elemist and the font changing. I don't remember this being in my copy that I read.
That's interesting. Well, this is a regular bookstore version, and when I say that, I mean it's not the... Sometimes they say... This is a Scholastic official copy or something like that, something to that line. Mm-hmm. And I think that is some sort of reprint, whereas I think this is an original run print. So, yeah, it's got that text inserted not here. That.
Mine is definitely a put-together copy. Let's just put it that way.
Okay, well, readers, as you're listening to this, if you own the book, open it up to page 100 and you will see exactly what I'm talking about. This text interrupts the story to say that the countdown has begun. So if we're looking at it, if we're taking this book at face value, it believes the countdown has started here at book 47, right here in the middle. There's a great conversation that Jake has with Axe that I just want to read really quickly, and then we'll scoot on to the next plot point, I swear. So Jake comes back and he talks to Axe about the dam building, right? Axe says, time is running out. We need your help to finish the dam. Jake narrates, not a word about what I'd done. With all that had happened between us and all that had gone down in this war, Axe still considered me his leader, still followed my orders and accepted my decisions. Not that it really mattered what Axe or anyone else thought, as long as they acted with loyalty, as long as they also understood that I'd already taken full responsibility for revealing us to the campers. No one else was to blame, not even Tobias. So this is kind of a interesting little insight into Jake's psyche, and especially as it pertains to Axe and the way that he had just behaved in the previous books.
Yeah, it's interesting that he kind of takes that off Axe, because that could have been a huge thing where Axe disobeyed him and went against the rest of the Animorphs. Like, they've done entire books on Axe for much less than that, in how he's separate from the Animorphs. But no, this specifically, it's. I guess when you're putting that much weight on your soldiers for the rest of the world and being part of the resistance, then this isn't that big of a deal to do that as well.
No, yeah, and it still shows that, like, Jake is like, you know, regardless of the personal things that go on between me and Axe, regardless of our friendship, our perceived friendship, I'm still going to use him like a leader would use a pawn in this war, right?
I do want to go back real quick because I did look at my copy of the book, and I do have that text. The countdown has begun. It will be over very, very soon. Now, have you gone back and looked at the Elemis text you were referencing and see if it was similar?
They use a different text for that, and that was specifically because the Elemist was talking to them and kind of inserting himself into the story. It was characterization. This is done not as a narrator, not as a character.
It's like marketing?
It's just an interruption. You know, it really brings the reader out of the story. But again, it fits this like theme of these things are the kids' war journals. And maybe this was like somebody scribbling in the note like, you know, Marco went mad after 50 years and was like, this is the moment where everything changed. So
I would not be surprised if the ghostwriter got the outline and Kay Applegate specifically wrote this one part where they talk about revealing to the campers and what this means. And then Kay Applegate wrote a line saying, this is the count. They're like, this is important because this is where the end really begins when they do this one thing. And they were like, well, we don't really have anyone to say that. Let's just put it as like a cool narration thing.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not entirely sure what their intention was there, other than to let readers know this long-running book series on war and animals is going to start winding down, maybe.
Winding up?
Winding up, okay. Yeah, ramping up in terms of action.
Yeah.
So, yeah, real quickly here. They're
You've been saying real quickly for the last hour of the summary.
That's because I'm staring at the last paragraph of my summary, and I swear I'm going to start making more points here probably. I'm really trying to decide like what is the most important things that I want to read here. So I talked about the Axe and Jake stuff. They're finishing up this beaver dam and doing their stuff as Tobias gives word that the massive Yeerk army is on its way. It's way bigger than they expected. It's only like an hour away, so the battle is coming, right? And like you said, they're kind of heightening the tension and drama by cutting back and forth strategically to this B-plot. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Kind of like a lot of other books do, except this one is literally a different plot and a different story. So it kind of works and it kind of doesn't, right?
I want to do a tangent real quick where I would have loved more than even having this whole Hork-Bajir story if it would have been Jake in the basement reading about the Civil War story, like never-ending story style, where he's just like, he's got a blanket over him and it's storming outside and he's just trying to like, he's so intensely into the story. And then the B plot would be that that his brother actually came home and is like really close to discovering something in his room that would like reveal him as an Animorph, but Jake's just down the basement, so engrossed in this Civil War story. Like, I don't know, that would have been more tied in than how random this Hork-Bajir Valley plot is, the Civil War stuff. I don't know. That's what I would have loved to see. Never-ending story in Animorphs.
The Animorphs version. Well, they could have done a lot more interesting things, I think, with a lot of these concepts. But I just kind of want to talk about the character of Richard right here. And this is basically our last moment with Richard. As soon as the battle begins, Richard has this like moment of clarity after speaking with Jake very briefly. And I'm going to read it to you very quickly.
Well, just to paint this battle too, one thing you haven't mentioned is the fact that they don't have any like Dracon beams or anything like that. Like the Animorphs have their morphs, obviously, but all the humans and the Hork-Bajir have like bows and arrows and sticks. Like that's what they're fighting with.
Yeah, they're literally sharpening spears to throw. So they're preparing for this battle. You know, they've sounded the horn of war essentially, and Richard, like I said, has a moment of clarity. Richard walked over to me, still wearing his bright yellow vest, his face clean. "When you say killed," he asked quietly, "you mean killed as in stunned or captured, right?" "Unfortunately, Mr. Carpenter, I mean killed as in dead." Richard's eyes widened, and I knew it was the first phase of panic. So he goes on to say, "Oh my God, I didn't realize. I've seen enough. We're going home. Lewis, Emily, get down from there." His kids, Richard's kids are, you know, they got war paint smeared on their face and they're holding little makeshift spears and they're hiding in the trees. And Richard has suddenly realized what a bad decision he's made as a father. That he has put his kids in this danger. And now he's like bargaining with them. He's like, "Come down out of the trees. We got to get out of here right now or I'm taking away your internet privileges," right? And sadly, it's too late for him. So he goes running off like into the trees, like by himself. He abandons his kids. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, just like worst father ever. I mean, just awful.
He really doesn't make the right decisions. And I can go back and pinpoint like why and what just by reading what he simply said when they signed on. He says his kids are going, "Yeah, let's help the good guys. Let's help the aliens." "Wait," Richard cried, "your mother would have a fit." Lewis grabbed his dad's arm. "Real aliens, Dad?" Richard looked down at his son's glowing face. "You're right, kid," he declared. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance. We'll join in your fight." Right? So you can see that like naive idealism. He wants to please his kids. He wants to join the war. But he hasn't really realized what it's going to mean. And here he has that moment. And honestly, what he should have done, what him and those campers should have done, is the adults should have sent an adult representative with all of the kids back home, got out of there, fled, and maybe two of those adults could have, you know, stuck around to help with the war stuff if they felt like it. But really, they all should have fled. There were civilians. They shouldn't have gotten involved. They didn't understand the scope of the war, and they ultimately became casualties, civilian casualties. That's what this book is about. It's about civilian casualties, Coleman.
It is, but I mean, kind of.
I know, buddy. I know I'm stretching here because I've read this book like 8 times now.
No, I'm saying the book is stretching.
Oh, absolutely. Look, the first time I read this, 2-3 years ago now, because of our hiatus, I didn't have a whole lot to say on this. I could have very quickly gone through this whole plot and read my summary and been like, here's what happens. But the more I read it, the more I thought about this particular conflict and these characters. And I think everything that happens at the beginning of the book and everything that happens kind of here at the end, which we're about to describe this battle scene, you can certainly talk about it in as much detail as you care to. But we know how these battle scenes go, right? Like, the fighting starts, and Animorphs is so good, always, at representing realistic hand-to-hand combat and animal warfare, let's call it.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I agree with you.
Okay, so, and then another, like, new thing this book kind of throws at us are these blue band Hork-Bajir class of elite soldiers. That these are the ones that, like, specifically guard Visor 1 now or something, right? They're his elite squadron.
Yeah, and this is the first instance of them being brought up? Because we saw some elite soldiers on their ships a couple times, and specifically when Visor 1 comes, but I don't think they were named Blue Band before.
I couldn't speak to it. I think I saw a comment somewhere. Somebody
they definitely used
talking
them a ton
about this
after
and said
this.
that. Yeah, somebody
yeah,
specifically said, and I'm sorry I don't have the quote in front of me, but they said this is where the dependence on Blue Band Hork-Bajir, specifying that, means that they're, like, insanely strong or skilled, right?
Uh-huh.
It's like they went super Hork-Bajir blue.
They did, and oh man, I'm looking at Seropedia right now, seeing if there's anything else. I mean, there's a quote where they're talking to Rachel Marco Grath, who's like their leader. No, we definitely haven't gotten to that yet. So I think the attack at the Hork-Bajir Valley is their first instance.
Cool. Well, so the battle starts, and, you know, at first they're, like, hiding and very camouflaged, and they're like, maybe we can avoid fighting. Maybe they'll just go home. And then they get spotted, and the battle, like, starts right away. And Visor 1 shows up almost instantly, and he uses his classic battle morph from the first book.
Sorry, gotta jump in here real quick, just to immediately retcon what I just said. They were introduced in book 45, The Revelation.
Oh, well, that was a recent one, and yeah, that had a lot of relevant plot updates. But you know what? We're taking notice of the blue bands now, and that's what's important.
It's about the blue bands we made along the way.
I like the callback to Visor 1 using his like, let's call it his ultimate battle morph that he displayed in the first book, right? I'd like to think that maybe if we got an extended universe or extra book somewhere, we could have seen Visor 1 practicing his battle morphs aboard, maybe not the Blade ship, but maybe like on a distant moon somewhere. Like that's where he goes to practice and train his morphs, right? That'd be so cool.
Yeah, no, that would be amazing. I think there was some mention of some moon he used to do something like that on. I can't remember which book that was
he mentions picking up various battle morphs on certain
I remember that,
moons.
but I remember him talking about hunting or doing something on a moon that wasn't just picking up a morph.
Yeah, it was finding that the dust cloud being from the first Megamorphs book. I think he specifically mentions that thing was rolling around a dusty moon or something.
He should have tried to morph that. That would have been hilarious.
I think they said they couldn't do it because it was like literally multiple little creatures.
No, that's what I'm saying. He would have gotten diced up. It would have been a good time.
Oh, well, save it for our review of Megamorphs number 1. Why don't you?
I've already done that.
Yeah. Well, what's cool is not only seeing this classic battle morph of Visor 1, but Tobias and Jake both take him on, head on, one-on-one. Like, Tobias specifically has a death wish and flies straight into his eyes and starts going hog wild or hawk wild on him. While Jake is like just, trying to stay alive and giving Axe the order to flood the valley. Like as soon as Visor 1 shows up and goes into his big destructive pyromancer morph. Jake's,
which is cool that we're reading this right after doing the graphic novel because we haven't seen that morph since the original book.
It made it so much more fresh in my mind. It really did.
Yeah, definitely.
Good callback to our previous episode. So, as I said, Jake's, screaming to flood the valleys, wondering if Axe is going to do it. It looks like he's about to die. It's another one of those situations where Visor 1 is about to kill him. And then the water comes and Deus ex machina's the whole thing, thus proving that water was the real hero all along.
Water was really the friends we made along the way.
Now you're relying on the same jokes.
That's the joke.
You must be getting tired.
No, but the whole beaver subplot of this.
It shouldn't have been the focus.
Which do you think came first? Do you think the idea of flooding the valley as part of the battle was the plot they set up, and then they came to beavers as the morph of the book, or did they want the morph of the book to be beavers, and so they set up this elaborate C plot to flood the valley?
That would be a really interesting look at how the book was put together, I guess.
Which came first, the chicken or the beaver?
The beaver plot or the flooding the valley plot? Yeah. I think maybe they had a list of animals that Scholastic approved as like, we want you to, inform kids about the beavers, right?
Oh gosh, which animals did they not approve? Like Animorphs After Dark. Like what was like, oh no, we can't have that in a book. You need a Serengeti.
You wanna know, buddy? Should we make a list of all the animals that we never got to see in an Animorphs book? Like pig or llama or snapping turtle. We can name animals. We can name tons of animals. Yeah.
But I would like to know, like, honestly, how they arrived at the animals for the book, like the main animal of the book that they were going to put on the cover. Like, was that a cover artist decision? Was that Kay Applegate being like, hey, really want to do a muskox on the front of this one?
Because they didn't want to show Jake morphing into Isaiah Fitzhenry. It wouldn't make sense story-wise.
It wouldn't. Where did the sword come from? Where did the Civil War uniform?
Okay, so...
Oh, sorry, never mind. They introduced in this book that you can morph clothes now. We're good.
There you go. Morphlore. Hashtag Morphlore. But like I was saying, water saves the day, and then everyone just kind of regroups and assumes, the Yeerks are washed out of the valley. That problem's gone now. They do mention how, the Yeerks will be back one way or another at some point in the future, and we need to vacate this area, right? You guys can stay on the fringe and kind of like hide out and lay low. And the Hork-Bajir are more or less like satisfied. They shot their shot, so to speak. They took a stand and did their thing, and now they're like, well, now we can just kind of do what's smart for us and move around a bit. Which is almost like a head slapping moment. Like, really? You couldn't have just done us the solid of like moving out of the valley for a week or something? And I think a lot of people would point out that why didn't they just immediately go to the Chi, their hidden underground area, and kind of set that up as a temporary bunker or shelter?
Well, that wouldn't have mattered. That wouldn't have mattered to this anyway, because the whole point of the Hork-Bajir is that they wanted to defend their land as free people. They could have ran off and done a billion different things, but they refused because they wanted to fight for their land. That was the whole point. Which, I mean, that's kind of the parallel.
That's the subplot of, yeah.
Well, no. So it's kind of a parallel to the townspeople of the B plot.
Yeah.
But not even that. It's almost like they added the townspeople because they realized that this story of racial division didn't have a tie to the Hork-Bajir Valley story, so they added maybe the townspeople to be like, oh, we're fighting for our land.
Yes, it was very muddled, for sure. They could have driven up, like I said, the differences between, accepting a group of people and accepting a group of space aliens, but they didn't quite hammer that specific point home hard enough.
What would have been great is if, I don't know how they would have done this with the racial tension of the time, but with the Civil War plot, if the freed slaves were going to be offered like land in this town if they helped fight or something like that.
Oh, that would have been a good wrap up for that story. If we thought, they all died in the conflict, but then we get one more chapter saying how they, moved into the town and integrated.
But it would have tied it to the Hork-Bajir Valley where they were actually fighting for their own land.
Oh, I like that. Let's rewrite this whole book.
Let's rewrite the whole series.
Okay. So we're basically at the end of the book. I just want to wrap things up here plot-wise. Basically, when they're all regrouping, Jake and Toby and the whole team, Tobias has to inform Jake that Richard died. Right, that's where we find out, he's dead and gone, and his kids, Tobias specifically says, Emily and Lewis lost their father. That was like the result of this conflict, and I think that kind of speaks towards like what was really achieved in this whole conflict, because you could look at it as like we were saying, they wanted to take a stand and fight as free peoples, right? Really, all that means, though, is that they're opening themselves up to more potential civilian casualties. And Jake's little bit here that he wraps up with at the end, I'll tell you, because he goes home, he just bails on this, and he has more of a stark contrast between war leader Jake and kid at home Jake still. So he goes home, and instead of talking to his family and feeling some kind of connection or bond there, he goes down into the basement again, and he goes through that journal, and he flips through the last pages, and he reads, I think, what you and I read, and he feels, I think, overwhelmingly that there's a message of hope here in all of this. Like, we keep fighting these dumb fights because of hope. We hope that we will come out of these conflicts on top, right? And I'll just read you this last bit here on the page here, real quick. It's right after Jake reads about his former ancestor's death. He says, I flipped to the last page of Fitzhenry's journal, and then he reads, hooves trampling the dirt all around, screams and wails of bloody dying men, unending nightmare, cannot get a full breath, numbness spreading down my arm, vision blurring, growing narrow like a field glass, a darkening tunnel. Jake, honey, lunch is ready. Mom. I jumped. Mom's voice had startled me. Coming, Mom, I called. I'll be right there. You'd better be, midget, Tom yelled down the stairs, or I'll eat your burger. I looked at the diary's last words, where blood and rain had smeared the ink. I fear I am killed. I hope I have done my best. I hope. Those were the last legible words Fitzhenry had tried and lost. How would my last page read? How would my story end? I hope I have done my best. Yeah, I whispered, closing the book. Me too. And if that is not so ominous and trying to prepare us for the actual end of the series, I don't know, what is. That is just like, it's a pretty good description overall of like what goes on in these books, right?
Well, I'll definitely give you that this book felt more written for the end of the series than even the last book, which the last book had big things happen in it. But this one feels more pushing us to the end, or really counting down to the end.
Yeah, it makes that point quite clear. Literally at one point.
Well, let's jump into the reviews after what happened. I mean, it just happened to be the longest summary we've ever done, and you said it was so short.
I think you just feel that way, but okay.
No, see, literally, because we only covered half the book in that summary. My little summary was super teeny tiny.
Well, would you like to give your review first, or shall I?
I can go first. That's fine.
Cool.
So, man, I don't know if you got from the my comments throughout this episode so far, but I didn't care for the Hork-Bajir Valley plot. I really thought there's just 15 different ways they could have made that more interesting, and a bigger deal that the Hork-Bajir were losing their valley. I mean, the fact that they fought and then just left, and the fact that they brought these campers in, and if they wanted to hit the beats of revealing their secret to more people and the Hork-Bajir losing their valley, I feel like both of those things could have been done in a much grander scale and kind of a ramp up to this end of the series. I don't know. I personally did not care a lot for how they handled that. Surprisingly, though, I actually really liked the Civil War story. I thought that's where the writer's heart was in this book. I feel like she really wanted to write a Civil War story, and she managed to get it into this Animorphs series. Maybe she pitched that to Kay Applegate after the success of her first ghostwritten book with them. I'm not sure. But I actually really liked the writing and the story of the Civil War B-plot, but I did not care for how it tied into the main plot or the main plot's progression in general. So, yeah, it's just really weird to come off with that, because I'm here for the Animorphs. That's what I'm excited about, and especially for the end of the series. But I really just enjoyed the Civil War plot, and just, obviously I like where the stakes are now, where the Hork-Bajir are out of their valley and the Yeerks are progressing and stuff like that, but I didn't think it was done in a super exciting way. So anyway, for my number review, I'm going to give this, let's say, 3 out of 5 wet musket powders. There you go.
Man, you're really grasping for your review score icon or whatever we want to call it.
It was very on purpose.
Well, you could have said a beaver pelt, I think.
No, it was relevant to the plot. At one point, their muskets got wet and they couldn't. Come on.
Oh, their muskets. I heard musk, and I assumed you meant like the beaver musk.
No, weird. Like musket powder. They're wet musket powder.
Okay. Well, then, very apt indeed, my friend, and
yeah,
a good opinion all around. Okay, so actually, I think we align a lot on our thoughts. I was hoping that you would actually be like really into this and way more excited, and I came out of this as the more excited one, which is, I didn't see that coming. So, cool. I'll tell you my thoughts though. This book is ultimately about Jake's struggle to command those who aren't his troops, like this civilian involvement with these war efforts. And one of the civilians even dies, having joined the war efforts, but ultimately not fully understanding the situation and becoming a civilian casualty. I thought that was a super interesting concept that is kind of, sort of, not fully fleshed out and well done here. It could have been done so much better. I really took to the character of Richard when examined by through this parent lens, like knowing that, oh my God, this guy's a dad with his kids and he's going to include them in the war. He's not getting them out of there. That hooked me as a parent, right? I'm just weird like that. I pay attention to those kind of relationship deals. So this is also a book that's kind of important, somewhat, because of the Morph lore update and because it moves the Free Hork-Bajir closer to interacting with humans and the rest of civilized society and just being known by humans and humanity in general. So it also kind of flounders in this whole comparison between human and Hork-Bajir and everything that we have in common. I feel like it kind of ham-fisted sort of comparing us. I have a question, and actually I'll pose this after my review. Or no, I'll pose it right now. You don't have to answer it. It can be a rhetorical one. But do you think that things would have been different had Jake decided to give these people the morphing power. I know they probably didn't have the time to run back to Cassie's barn or wherever and get the morphing cube, and they didn't want to even open up that option for debate. But they could have armed their troops a little bit better in this situation. That could be a whole discussion on its own. I think maybe...
I know we don't like interrupting each other's reviews, and
I don't typically pose questions
question
during a review, yeah.
Yeah, and that I know you said that was rhetorical, but I think it would have actually been really interesting and would have said something about the Civil War B-plot if they had given them morphing ability, but all the civilians died, but the only animal they could have morphed in time that they could have fought with were the Hork-Bajir who were in the valley. And so they would have had all these dead bodies, and they would have buried them together because they wouldn't have known who was morphed and who wasn't.
Oh, that's a cool idea, Coleman. And even better than that, I really like the idea of the civilians getting caught up in the war and joining the army and literally morphing Hork-Bajir and, joining them in that way. That would have been a really cool idea. Wow. What? You got more?
Or joining them. Hold on. Or joining them, morphing Hork-Bajir, joining them in the fight, but the fight lasted so long and they were so pinned down they couldn't morph back in time for the 2-hour limit.
Yeah.
And so they literally had to join the Hork-Bajir.
Oh my God. Yeah. That would have been an awesome consequence. Oh boy.
And would have tied into them being obsessed with aliens and all that. They would have become aliens.
Okay, so if they had done something like that, they would have had to cut the Isaiah stuff, the Fitzhenry side plot, right?
Yeah, somewhat, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think so. And they could have done this one right. I really like what we just came up with there. I'll finish my review. This book reads kind of like a love letter, sort of, to humanity that's basically just trying to say, instead of looking at all of our differences and fighting all the time amongst ourselves, we should all just kind of learn to accept each other and our differences and get along and stop the needless death and this history of war and conflicts between people who are different. I pointed out during the review how I kind of liked the similarity between Jake and Tobias and their recruitment methods, and how that could be compared or juxtaposed to the Yeerks' recruitment tactics. But this is kind of a book that more or less states that the countdown has begun and it'll all be over very, very soon. It's an ominous warning for sure. It's unfortunate that it just kind of fell in such a forgettable book. I think this book poses a lot of smart questions and concepts, and it tries to do these cool things, but it just kind of flounders it and fumbles the ball here in the end. So you're right, buddy. I'm 100% with you. I think, as it stands, this version of the story is a 3 out of 5 beaver dams.
Wow.
What do you think?
Who's reaching now for their review?
Oh, come on. I practiced that.
No, I'm glad we line up because I would have been weirdly weirded out if this was like, our last book review where we were so opposed in our review.
I was hoping you would give it the 5 and then I could ground us with that 3. But,
No, I think this is straight down the middle. Just an Animorphs book, just a good old, read through, and it's got its problems, but they turn to beavers.
They turn to beavers. That's unfortunately anything anybody will remember from this book, even though I feel like it could be a representative of so much more. It's the damn dumb beaver book. All right, there you go.
Yeah, which is crazy to me because it is when they lose the Hork-Bajir Valley. Like that's been so prevalent throughout the whole series. It's weird that it goes out in such a whimper.
They're going to be examining that, though, throughout the rest of the books, and we'll get bits and snippets of, the Hork-Bajir moved into this abandoned house on the fringe of town or whatever, They'll keep moving them closer. That being said, that concludes our reviews and ratings of this story, but stick around for this end show here because we're going to go through some Patreon supporters' reviews and thoughts on the book. And if you don't mind, I'll just kind of wail away on those. We've only got 2 to share from our boys, Ben and Jeff, on the Patreon. You mind if I shoot this off real quick?
Jump right into it.
Okay, so Ben Freeman, maybe I shouldn't use his last name. Whatever. Our friend Ben says, so you don't like... I've never read this, by the way, so this is my first time reading it. And I'm just trying to figure out like how he wrote it because he put this in quotes. It looks like it's a K.A. Applegate quote that he wrote. So he says... So you don't like the way our little fictional war came out? You don't like... Oh, geez, he goes into some spoilers here. All right, put your earmuffs on if you don't want spoilers. You don't like Rachel dead and Tobias shattered and Jake guilt-ridden? You don't like that one war simply led to another? Fine. Pretty soon you'll all be of voting age and of draft age. So when someone proposes a war, remember that even the most necessary wars, even the rare wars where the lines of good and evil are clear and clean, end with a lot of people dead, a lot of people crippled, and a lot of orphans, widows, and grieving parents. If you're mad at me because that's what you have to take away from Animorphs, too bad. I couldn't have written it any other way, and remain true to the respect I have always felt for Animorphs readers. He signed this K.A. Applegate, so this is obviously his interpretation of what K.A. meant when this thing was written.
No. This is a very well-known quote from K.A. Applegate. She wrote a letter at the end of the series. Oh, is that what it is?
Thank you for the clarity.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm sorry, he goes on to say, I can't remember if you guys read the note on air, but this came out right before 9/11. So, yeah, that seems pretty relevant now. Interesting. And he included a link, which I'm sorry, Ben, I didn't click on it in time. I just asked you for your thoughts and then started doing this episode. So, cool. I like that so much more now that I know it's a real quote from K.A. Nice.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a quote that I've never fully agreed with. I mean, I like that she showed real war in the end of the series. But some of it is excusing, like the idea that war sometimes just leads to more war. She could have shown that at the end of the series without a cliffhanger ending. You know, that's really why people got upset by the ending, is because it leaves off in a cliffhanger. I mean, it's that simple.
Yeah, it's not very narratively fulfilling, I will say. And I think that's been a source of contention for a lot of fans, is how the series was left off. And I think as the creators, as the authors of the series, this happened, a good couple of decades ago, a decade or so, and now they probably have different feelings on how they would want to approach a ending to this series or story. So
it'll all be fine if they just continue the series. That's it. New writers, I don't care what it takes. Just, let's do it. Jump in.
Here's what Jeff has to say. Jeff says, some notes on the Resistance. What is it with Jake's mom at the very beginning? Jake, where the hell have you been? I know your best friend was just violently murdered, but you've got to do some chores. We need to renovate the basement immediately so you and your surviving friends can hang out there. Make sure you close all the windows I left open right before a storm for no explicable reason. I'll be home in about 40 seconds. which was a very small point in the plot. Do you think Sergeant Spears is a distant ancestor of Britney Spears? He is shown for the first time the page after Marco makes a Britney Spears reference. He is described as statuesque with a husky voice and stands above the other soldiers as if on a stage. Gotta be intentional, right? I didn't pick up on that.
These are the kind of hard point connections that they made between the Animorphs world in this book and the Civil War. Got to get that Britney Spears loop in.
Well, it's pop culture. It's for the kids. Kids love it. So he goes on. Did Visor 3 run out of morphs or something? Is this the first time he reuses a morph? Why not morph a cat? and I like that suggestion. But I think it was kind of cool seeing him use this and kind of establishing it as the new Visor 1 go-to Battlemorph, right? Our main team has their Battlemorphs. Why can't he have one?
Yeah, I mean, Visor 3's morphs have always been kind of all over the place, and I feel like sometimes they've been like variations of themselves. Like he has other morphs that are like multi-headed and stuff. The two that really stand out to me are this one and the one he used in David's room in book 20, where it was like a pile driver with like traffic cones for hands that he like shot out and like was destroying walls with. For some reason, those are the two I remember the most.
I don't remember that one now that you're talking about it.
Yeah, but he doesn't have like all his morphs are kind of random. So I like that they brought this one back. I thought it was cool that it establishes more.
Yeah, they're oddly situational, aren't they?
Yeah, just a giant fight. I mean, has he ever brought the morph back that he ate Elfangor with? Have we ever seen that one again?
Well, I kind of thought that was this one. He ate Elfangor with it, and then he also used it at the end.
That one was a big mouth. That one was like a big mouth. It was almost like a giant Taxon almost or something. Whereas this is the one he used in the Yerk pool when he was shooting fireballs at everybody.
Oh, I'll have to go back and look at the graphic novel to see if what the real differences are between those. Because I was under the impression they were the same. Oopsie.
No, I don't think so. Thank you, Chris Grind, for having a visual reference we can now go back to and check.
Yeah, when we're bored.
Friend of the show, Chris Grind.
Friend of the show. Hashtag friend of the show, Chris Grind.
/ co-host.
I'll read just his last bit, his summary, if you will. He says, I would give this book 3.5 out of 5. Thoop. Oh, 2s. That was his thing. I enjoyed how the narrative was split between Jake and Fitzhenry, and I enjoyed the parallels demonstrated between their lives. I also enjoyed the run-in with the Trekkie Trek, even if it got a little on the nose by the end. My main gripe is that this book is describing an event that is extremely important in the Animorphs canon. The Hork-Bajir Valley is revealed and enters a state of open revolt, and the Animorphs reveal their secret to nerds who will inevitably post it online, etc., and yet the book spends very little time describing that event or discussing the potential fallout. I wish the Fitzhenry Diary had been used in a filler book instead. I recognize that this wasn't so much a mini review, more of a review, so please don't feel obligated to read the whole thing. And I just did, you beautiful boy, you. So, yeah, he brings up a great point. I feel like we're in agreement that this book had some cool concepts, but he did bring up a good point. He did bring up a good point until he used a half review, which is a restricted, usage on this podcast. We don't do half reviews. Okay,
but pure chaos around here.
I would just say that I would add an asterisk to that. And for all intents and purposes, we call this a 3 book. But the 0.5 denotes that there is something just a little extra special about this one. It could have been.
Michelle, so maybe. if we allowed 0.5s in this podcast.
I'm not
I know we're not doing them. But I'm saying if we did do 0.5s for this book, would you do a 3.5 or a 2.5?
Oh, a 3.5. I think it adds to it what it could have had, right? Even if it's not there, it could have had it.
If we did 0.5s, I would have done a 2.5.
It would have to been a different book, like we're saying, cut out that Fitzhenry plot and focus more on the meat of the story being the recruitment of these new cadets to the war.
Sure.
Like, that's interesting, okay? So that's the thoughts of our Patreon supporters. I really want to read more of these things in future shows, so please sign up for the Patreon and continue to interact with us in that capacity, and we're going to have so much more fun. So that's our review here of Animorphs number 47, The Resistance. What did you guys think? Is this book as forgettable as we're saying it is? Do you see the hidden potential? What other kinds of stories would you like to see pop out of these concepts? Hit us with a hashtag I want that book. That's what we want to hear. That's what we want to interact with you guys. And that's what we want to talk about with the remainder of this podcast. As I say, we're entering the top 10. This is 10. Like, next one's 9. We're going down. It's countable. It's quantifiable.
Unfortunately, the next one isn't relevant to the end of the series whatsoever. I'm actually looking forward to reading it again. No, we always talk about the next book at the end of the episode.
I don't have it in front of me. I don't know what it is.
Well, it is. It's going to be book number 48, The Return. Which is the return of David, which we talked about in our return.
Awesome. Well, okay, now that you mentioned that, I'm excited because I recall, I don't want to spoil it here, but I had feelings on this book.
I'm just going to say I liked this book, but I know a lot of people hate it. So it's going to be an interesting episode to reread it and see.
Oh, okay, fine. Then I'll just say that I was one that hated it, okay? I hope my feelings change. I really do. I want to have some really good discussion on how it's handled because this is such an important character. And if you didn't know that David returned, yeah, there's a book on it, and we're about to talk about it next time on Thoughtspeak.
Well, that's all we got for this week. Please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/ThoughtSpeakcast. Also, jump onto iTunes or whatever podcast player you use and leave us a review. If you don't feel like supporting us financially or if you're not able to do that, that's totally fine. But leaving us a review on whatever player you listen to or on iTunes really helps out the show and gets us into more ears. You can also check us out on Reddit at @Animorphs. We tend to post on there and chat on there a little bit. Or on Twitter at Morphcast, where we talk quite a bit. And we also have a Facebook group if you want to check us out there. Just facebook.com/ThoughtSpeak. Anyway, we will see you next week. And by next week, I mean whenever the next podcast comes out. So look forward to that then.
Sounds good. Well, until then, I am your host, Michelle.
And I'm Coleman. And we'll see you next time